Today's date is January 2nd, 2012. Happy New Year. We're broadcasting from Los Angeles, California. The Guardian, Vanessa D. Johnson Taylor, has filed another complaint to sell the property of Ward Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson has been ruled incapacitated by the court and is presently living at the Woodlands Nursing Home on Woodland Avenue, Plainfield, New Jersey. There's been numerous questions about his care there, being that his attorney, James Boutelier, who was appointed by the court, says one thing, and Vanessa D. Taylor, guardian appointed by the court, says something else. So there is some questions about him being malnutritioned at the Woodlands Nursing Home, and I would not recommend anyone put their loved ones in a nursing home where there's been accusations of malnutrition by the guardian herself. Again, the guardian is Vanessa D. Taylor. She's appointed by the court, and she's also works for the Taylor Insurance Group out of Manalapan, New Jersey. The Taylor Group Incorporated. They have a website, and they're out of Manalapan, New Jersey. A lot of references are in the court papers to the Taylor Group Incorporated. So there is a connection of co-mingling of the Ward's estate and also the funds of the Taylor Group. And the Taylor Group has government contracts, apparently. So the Guardian has applied the second time for approval to sell the property, and the property is located at 146-148 Fabian Place in Newark, New Jersey. And in that complaint to sell the property, this is the second complaint by her. At a hearing on December 23rd, the judge told her to redo the complaint again because she's missing the second appraisal that is required. There's two appraisals required in order to sell property of an incapacitated person, and there's a kind of lack of specificity regarding the bills. Apparently the Guardian has said that the bills of the Ward justify selling the property, but there's numerous questions about what those bills really are. Do they really exist or not? Have they already been paid? And the judge ordered her on December 23rd to provide a list of estimated bills to be paid, as well as providing a second appraisal on the property, as well as responding to some of the issues concerning the Medicaid approval. Again, this was one of the things that Vanessa D. Johnson Taylor and the attorneys James Boutelier, Shonda Floyd, Lawrence E. Meyerson represented to the court, was that the property had to be sold in order to qualify for Medicaid. But apparently Mr. Johnson, the Ward, qualified for Medicaid last October. So there's some question here as to whether there was fraud or not committed on the estate, and why was it misrepresented, the conditions leading up to Medicaid. Again, Vanessa D. Taylor, James Boutelier, Lawrence E. Meyerson, Shonda Floyd have admitted in past proceedings to fraud on the estate. So I'm going to read from some of the opposition papers that were served on the court and all parties and served on Judge Walter Koprowski. This is an excerpt from one of the opposition papers to the sale of property, and this opposition would have been received by the court somewhere around December 8th, 2011. The sale of property is stopped by Shonda Floyd's statement to the appellate division that Samuel Figaro was no longer interested in purchasing the property. Figaro is stopped from now purchasing the property. That was in reference to the fact that before the appellate court, Shonda Floyd, as well as James Boutelier, an attorney, represented that the previous alleged buyer, Savio Figaro, wanted to be released from the contract of sale. And so apparently there was an email exchange back and forth where Mr. Figaro was released from the contract. Unfortunately, Mr. Boudelier represented on December 23rd that the new contract is an amendment of the old contract. Well, how can you amend something that does no longer exist? Okay, so again, this is why Mr. Boudelier and the Guardian are being charged with fraud on the court. And I'm not trying to give legal advice here, but the word fraud, of course, represents or is defined as a misrepresentation. It could be intentional, it could be accidental, it could be concealment, it could be an omission. But fraud goes to the fact that you're misrepresenting the facts that are actually occurring, and you're trying to mislead someone into believing something that is not true. So that's my opinion as to the definition of fraud. The sale of the property is stopped by the fraud on the court by Judge Joseph P. Brennan, Judge Walter Koprowski, fraud and admitted fraud by Vanessa D. Taylor, James Boudelier, and Lawrence N. Meyerson. All orders of the judge regarding the sale of property are void due to breach of duty by the guardian and fraud on the court. Family members are requested to show support by assessing unfair, illegal, and unconstitutional fees against next of kin Johnson. The Chancery Court has slave-chained Johnson in a chilling Auschwitz move to keep him from objecting to Taylor and the others' admitted elderly financial abuse and fraud on the estate of Robert Johnson. Next of kin asked that every family member, Johnson or otherwise, filed an amicus brief in support of the opposition to the sale of the property. And of course, Auschwitz is the concentration camp where the Nazis and the Germans in history deprived those at the concentration camp of their liberties, or freedom, their property, and of course their lives. And of course, we don't want the conditions of Auschwitz to be repeated in history. I don't think anybody wants that. But this court and this judge and those connected with him have been accused of creating Auschwitz-type conditions. Judge Koprowski is aware that by not answering a motion and complaint in this matter, Vanessa D. Johnson Taylor and others admitted unlawful acts, fraud, collusion, real estate fraud, attorney ethical violations, and misconduct, and elderly financial abuse. By ignoring the admitted fraud and not taking action to punish the wrongdoers, the court has continued the fraud. The opposition is also forwarded by letter and fax. The past practice of the Chancery Court was to allow fax filing in the case of Alvantine Anderson, an incapacitated person, docket ESX-CP-0105-2004. The practice of the court in this case was to allow letters and faxes to be filed as part of the record. The rulings of the judge indicated very clearly that the judge, Walter Koprowski, made letters a part of the record. At the same time, he omitted and concealed from the record that he had received pleadings that were sent to him for filing with the court. And the judge, I think a year later or over a year later, after he had been questioned on this 2 or 3 times a month over a whole year, the judge responded and said that some of the documents had not been filed because they were not original signed documents. The judge omitted the fact that in the Anderson case, the judge had freely allowed faxes to be filed as original documents. So this was fraud committed by the judge in writing on April 6 and April 6, 2001 letter. Also, the judge did not comply with local rules of court, which require that if a document is sent in for filing and it is returned to the sender because something has been omitted, it must be stamped received but not filed. And the person must be told that if you send it back with the whatever is missing, the money or attachments or whatever, that the document will be filed. But the April 6, 2011 letter of Judge Koprowski never mentioned any of the local rule requirements in this manner. New Jersey statute also requires that the guardian make an effort to talk to the ward about his wishes about the sale of the property. There's no indication in the complaint of Vanessa D. Johnson Taylor, that she talked to Robert Johnson. Such failure voids her proposed sale of property. The fraud is continuing and evidenced in the filing of the claim for damages against the state of New Jersey. This is a claim that's been filed, and it is involving this sale of property. And this claim was received by the Attorney General's Office of New Jersey around October 18th, 2011. But there were previous claims to that claim that have been forwarded to the Attorney General, of which there was no response prior to. These claims were received by the Attorney General's Office prior to October 2011, as far back as a year ago. But the claim for damages, of course, is against the Attorney General and the state of New Jersey and the Superior Court and Essex County Court, as well as Judge Walter Koprowski and others. The court has in the past represented that letters as opposed to pleadings have been filed as a practice with the court. The court filed the letters of Vanessa D. Taylor, Shonda Floyd, James Boutelier, and Lawrence Meyerson. Such letters dated November 9th, 2010, January 20th, 2011, February 8th, 2011. But according to the court, as the court told to next of kin, letters do not get filed with the court, although the court at this point has refused to respond to numerous inquiries about, okay, why were these letters of these attorneys filed with the court if the court only accepts original pleadings for filing? So the judge and the surrogate's office still have not responded to this question. The court has not responded to the fact that the court received the original next of kin's opposition to the sale of property, but in the April 6, 2011 letter neglected to mention that the court had received two original copies on two different dates of the opposition to the first sale of property, and the judge has not responded to where that opposition is at. So the letters of Vanessa Taylor, Shonda Floyd, Boutelier, and Meyerson are fraud on the court. And the sale of the property to Savio Fergaro is stopped also by the Supreme Court action in which Mr. Boutelier told the appellate court that the previous buyer had been released from the contract. Shonda Floyd made similar statements to the Supreme Court and also told the Supreme Court that the guardian, Vanessa D. Johnson Taylor, had not been able to fulfill the duties of guardian of the estate, and was not able to handle the estate since she was appointed guardian February 3rd, 2010. So the question becomes, if Vanessa Taylor was not able to perform the duties of guardian, then who indeed signed her name to the contract of sale in June of 2011? This is further fraud upon the court. The judge has supported a $36,000 plus credit, now it's gone to $58,000 credit, to the buyer of the property, and there's questions surrounding that because the buyer was given a $58,000 loan, or applied for a $58,000 loan from HUD. But the problem is that the parties represented to the court prior to this year that the repair credit would have to be around $35,000. That was repeatedly represented to the court. Now the evidence has been produced that it was August of 2010 that the parties knew that the repairs needed were $58,000 in 2010. And yet the parties represented that the court needed to give more money to the buyer because the repairs were only set at $35,000. This has been called further fraud on the court. You see the flyer in front of you: unethical, corrupt, immoral, and criminal. No justice in this court. America demands a federal investigation of Judge Walter J. Koprowski, and he is a New Jersey judge. This judge has been repeatedly asked to recuse himself from the case and to resign from the bench, and he has refused. In a new letter, a 32-page letter to the Attorney General, as well as the Supreme Court of New Jersey Advisory Committee on Judicial Conduct, to also Glenn Grant, Acting Administrative Director of the Superior Court, and to others, a December 26th letter again asks for the recusal of the judge, and also states that the next of kin states, "I'm sure that Hitler thought that he was being, quote, fair, unquote. I'm sure the Ku Klux Klan thought they were being fair, quote, unquote. But I am not suggesting or implying that history applies here. Rather, I am stating it definitively and unequivocally, unquote, that history does apply here." The judge has intentionally concealed pleadings from the record. This Judge Walter J. Koprowski needs to be removed from the bench today. We'll have more coming up in later reports, so please stay tuned.